Rejected German Shepherd at shelter is adopted by a young man, and what happens next moves everyone to tears. Rain pounded against the metal roof of Last Hope Animal Shelter, its rhythm matching the heavy hearts inside. Through the dim fluorescent lights, a once majestic German Shepherd lay motionless in the corner of his kennel. His coat, dulled by neglect, had lost its shine. The tag on his cage read, Kaiser, warning, unadoptable. Drop a heart if this story touches your soul, and let us know where you're watching from. The shelter buzzed with the usual sounds, barking, whining, the occasional excited yelp of a dog meeting its new family. But Kaiser remained silent. His amber eyes, once bright with life, now stared blankly at the wall. Even when other dogs found their forever homes, he didn't move. Not an inch, not a muscle. Maria, the veteran shelter worker, wiped away a tear as she updated his file. Day 89, still no response to human interaction, refuses food unless left alone, shows signs of severe trauma. Her pen hesitated over the final box. With a heavy heart, she checked, scheduled for final assessment. The shelter's policy was clear. 3 months was the maximum they could keep unadoptable cases. Kaiser's time was running out. "I've never seen anything like it," Maria whispered to her colleague, Jake. "It's like his soul left, leaving just a shell behind." She remembered the day they found him, huddled in an alley during the worst storm of the year. No chip, no collar, just scars that told a story of unimaginable cruelty. The other dogs gave Kaiser a wide berth. Something about him spoke of deep wounds, not just physical, but spiritual. Even the shelter's most experienced handlers couldn't reach him. Food was left untouched unless the room was empty. Water bowls remained full until darkness fell. One morning, a young man named Ryder walked in. His clothes were worn but clean, his eyes carrying their own story of loss. He wasn't like the usual adopters who came looking for puppies or friendly companions. Instead, he headed straight for the back section where they kept the challenging cases. "Can I help you?" Maria asked, noting his determined stride. "I'm looking for a dog that everyone else has given up on," Ryder replied, his voice soft but firm. Maria's heart skipped a beat. In 15 years at the shelter, she'd never heard those exact words. She led him down the row of kennels, past the hopeful faces and wagging tails, until they reached Kaiser's corner. "This is our most difficult case," she began, but stopped short. Something extraordinary was happening. Kaiser, who hadn't acknowledged a human in months, had lifted his head. His eyes, previously empty, now fixed on Ryder with an intensity that made Maria's breath catch. Ryder knelt slowly, not breaking eye contact. The shelter fell silent, as if every creature held its breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph, holding it where only Kaiser could see. The German Shepherd's ears twitched. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in those dead eyes. Recognition? Fear? Hope? Then it was gone. But the moment had passed, and nothing would ever be the same. "What did you show him?" Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ryder carefully tucked the photo away. "Sometimes," he said, "the deepest wounds come from places we least expect." He turned to Maria, his expression unreadable. "I'd like to adopt him." "But you don't understand," Maria protested. "He's dangerous, unpredictable. We don't even know what happened to him. He could be..." "Broken?" Ryder finished. "Sometimes the most broken ones are the ones who need us most." He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a series of scars that made Maria gasp. "I know something about being broken too." As the rain continued its relentless drumming, Kaiser watched Ryder fill out the adoption papers. For the first time in months, he moved from his corner, taking one small step forward. No one noticed the tears in Maria's eyes, or the way her hands shook as she processed the paperwork. No one except Kaiser, who somehow sensed that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about all the lost souls who needed just one person to believe in them, one chance to prove that even the most shattered spirit could be made whole again. But as Ryder prepared to take Kaiser home, none of them could have imagined the dark secrets that lay ahead, or the price they would all pay for uncovering the truth about why Kaiser had ended up at Last Hope Shelter in the first place. The drive home was silent. Ryder's old pickup truck rumbled through the rain-slicked streets while Kaiser sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the passing shadows. The photograph that had sparked that moment of recognition lay heavy in Ryder's pocket, its edges worn from years of handling. They pulled up to a modest house on the outskirts of town. The yard was small but fenced, with an ancient oak tree spreading its protective branches over the roof. As Ryder opened the truck door, Kaiser didn't move. "It's okay," Ryder said softly. "No one will hurt you here." He reached for Kaiser's leash, but stopped when he saw the dog's slight tremor. Instead, he simply opened the passenger door and waited. Minutes passed. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by distant thunder. Finally, Kaiser took a tentative step onto the wet ground. His paws sank into the soft earth, and for a moment, something like confusion crossed his face. Inside the house, Ryder had prepared a corner with a plush bed, water bowl, and food. But Kaiser ignored these comforts, choosing instead to press himself against the wall furthest from any windows or doors. His muscles were tense, ready to flee from invisible threats. That night, neither of them slept. Ryder sat on the floor a few feet from Kaiser, speaking in low, gentle tones about nothing in particular. The stories he told painted pictures of peaceful places, mountain streams, quiet forests, open fields where no shadows lurked. Around midnight, Kaiser's stomach growled loudly. The sound seemed to startle him, and he pressed even harder against the wall. Ryder slowly pushed a bowl of food closer, then returned to his spot. "You know," he said, pulling out the photograph again, "I found him just like you." In the dim light, Kaiser's eyes fixed on the image. Another German shepherd, proudly wearing a service dog vest. His name was Magnus. "He saved my life in more ways than one." Kaiser's ears twitched at the name. This time, the recognition in his eyes lasted longer. "You knew him, didn't you?" Ryder's voice cracked slightly. "That's why you responded at the shelter. You recognized Magnus." For the first time, Kaiser made a sound, a soft whimper that seemed to carry years of pain. Ryder's hands began to shake as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed started falling into place. "He disappeared 3 years ago," Ryder continued, studying Kaiser's reaction. "The police said he probably just ran away, but Magnus would never—" He stopped as Kaiser suddenly stood up, his whole body trembling. The next moment would be seared into Ryder's memory forever. Kaiser took 3 shaky steps forward and gently nosed the photograph. A single tear fell from Ryder's eye onto the image, and Kaiser did something extraordinary. He looked up, meeting Ryder's gaze with eyes that now held a glimmer of understanding. They had both lost someone. They had both been broken. And somehow, in this moment, they recognized in each other a chance at healing. But just as this fragile connection formed, a car backfired in the street outside. Kaiser's transformation was instant and terrifying. He bolted to the corner, teeth bared, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. His eyes were wild with fear and something else, rage. Ryder saw it then. The thin white line around Kaiser's neck where fur hadn't grown back properly. The same kind of mark Magnus had worn from his service dog collar. But on Kaiser, it looked different. Wrong. As he watched the traumatized dog in his corner, Ryder made a silent vow. He would discover what connected Kaiser to Magnus, and who had turned this proud, noble animal into a creature of fear and shadows. But he had no way of knowing that this promise would lead him down a path that would uncover a conspiracy of cruelty beyond anything he could imagine, or that the answers he sought would put both their lives in danger. The next few days fell into a careful routine. Ryder worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which meant he could spend every moment observing Kaiser's subtle changes. The German shepherd only ate after midnight, when the world outside fell silent. He drank water in quick, nervous laps, as if expecting it to be taken away. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with the distance. Each day, Kaiser's corner shifted a few inches closer to where Ryder sat with his laptop. Neither acknowledged this silent dance, but both were intensely aware of it. By the 4th day, only 6 feet separated them instead of 12. Then came the nightmares. They struck without warning. Kaiser would jerk awake, his legs scrambling against invisible restraints, desperate whimpers escaping his throat. The first time it happened, Ryder instinctively moved to comfort him. Kaiser's reaction was explosive. He snapped at the air, eyes unseeing, lost in whatever horror his mind was replaying. Ryder called Maria at the shelter, hoping for insight. Did he ever have nightmares there? No, she said, her voice thoughtful. But he never really slept either. He would just watch all night long. The breakthrough came on a quiet Sunday morning. Ryder was sorting through old boxes, looking for more pictures of Magnus, when he found his old service dog training manual. As he flipped through the pages, something fell out. A business card for Elite Guardian Training Academy. The moment Kaiser heard the rustling paper, his head snapped up. His eyes locked onto the manual with an intensity that made Ryder's heart race. Slowly, carefully, Ryder held up the business card. Kaiser's reaction was immediate and shocking. He began to shake violently, his teeth chattering with fear. But instead of retreating to his corner, he took a stumbling step toward Ryder, then another, and another. "It's okay," Ryder whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "You're safe now." Kaiser's nose touched the business card, and suddenly the pieces started falling into place. The white line on his neck wasn't from a regular service dog collar. It was too thick, too scarred. The way he reacted to loud noises wasn't just fear, it was trained response. Ryder's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and searched for Elite Guardian Training Academy. The website was sleek, professional. "Training tomorrow's guardians today," the tagline read. Photos showed proud German shepherds in various poses: alert, attacking, guarding. Each dog wore a thick black collar with a metallic box attached. A sick feeling grew in Ryder's stomach as he scrolled through the images. Then he saw it, in the background of one photo, barely visible but unmistakable. A dog that looked exactly like Magnus, wearing the same type of collar that had left scars on Kaiser's neck. Just then, Kaiser did something unprecedented. He pressed his body against Ryder's leg, trembling but determined. When Ryder looked down, he saw tears in the dog's eyes, actual tears. And in that moment, he understood. Kaiser wasn't just connecting Magnus's disappearance to the training academy. He was trying to tell Ryder that Magnus hadn't disappeared at all. He had been taken. The realization hit Ryder like a physical blow. His hands clutched Kaiser's fur, and for the first time, the dog didn't pull away. They sat there together, two broken souls united by a shared loss and a terrible truth. But as the sun set outside Ryder's window, casting long shadows across the floor, neither of them knew that they were being watched. In a black SUV parked down the street, a man in a crisp military uniform lowered his binoculars and spoke into a phone. "Sir, we found him, and he's with someone who knew Magnus." The voice that replied was cold, calculated. "Keep watching. If they start asking questions, you know what to do." As night fell over the quiet neighborhood, Kaiser's ears perked up at a sound too faint for human hearing. The soft click of a camera lens, capturing every move they made. The hunt had begun, but this time, Kaiser wasn't the prey. He was the bait. That night, Ryder couldn't sleep. The weight of his discovery pressed down on him like a physical thing. He sat at his kitchen table, the business card from Elite Guardian Training Academy lying before him like a loaded gun. Kaiser lay at his feet, the closest he had ever stayed voluntarily, his body tense with shared anxiety. The morning brought an unexpected visitor. Maria from the shelter stood on his doorstep, her face pale with worry. "I had to come," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Something's wrong. 2 men came to the shelter yesterday, asking questions about Kaiser. They said they were from animal control, but..." She pulled out her phone, showing Ryder a photo she'd secretly taken. The men wore civilian clothes, but their military posture was unmistakable. Kaiser, who had been watching from the hallway, let out a low growl, not of aggression, but of recognition. He knew these men. "There's more," Maria whispered, her hands shaking as she pulled out a thick folder. "I went through our old records. 3 years ago, right around when you said Magnus disappeared, we had a string of German shepherd disappearances. All of them were service dogs or had special training. All of them vanished without a trace." Ryder's blood ran cold as he flipped through the pages, photo after photo of proud, noble dogs, all gone. But it was the last page that made his heart stop. A newspaper clipping dated just weeks before Magnus disappeared. "Elite Guardian Training Academy wins military contract for advanced canine program." Kaiser pressed against Ryder's leg, whimpering softly. In that moment, a memory surfaced. something Magnus's trainer had once said. Some dogs have a gift. They can sense things others can't, feel things deeper. It makes them special. But it also makes them vulnerable. Maria's voice dropped even lower. Last night, someone broke into the shelter. They took all the records of Kaiser's intake, but they missed something. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather collar, Kaiser's original collar, found with him in the alley. I kept it in my locker, meaning to clean it. Look at this. Under the layers of dirt and weathering, barely visible, was a small metal plate. Ryder cleaned it carefully with trembling fingers. 3 numbers emerged, 617. A serial number? He wondered aloud. No, Maria said, her voice breaking. A count. The implications hit Ryder like a thunderbolt. Kaiser wasn't just any training casualty. He was the 617th dog to go through whatever program had taken Magnus. And he had escaped. Suddenly Kaiser's head snapped up, his ears forward. A second later, they all heard it. The sound of car doors closing, multiple sets of footsteps approaching the house. Back door, Ryder whispered urgently, grabbing his keys and phone. But as they turned to flee, Kaiser did something unexpected. He walked calmly to Ryder's laptop and pawed at it, his eyes intense with purpose. Understanding flashed between them. Whatever evidence existed about the training program, about Magnus, about all the missing dogs, it would be on their website, in their records. They needed proof. The footsteps grew closer. Maria's hands flew to her mouth as shadows passed by the windows. But Ryder was already moving, fingers flying over the keyboard as he downloaded everything he could find about Elite Guardian. Kaiser stood guard, his body language transformed. No longer was he the cowering shelter dog. In this moment of crisis, his training surfaced, but this time, it would serve to protect, not destroy. The front door handle began to turn. Maria grabbed the folder of evidence. Ryder pocketed the hard drive. And Kaiser, in a display of intelligence that left them both stunned, grabbed his old collar in his teeth. They slipped out the back door just as the front door burst open, but their escape route was already blocked. A figure stepped out of the shadows, his uniform pristine, his smile cold. "Mr. Ryder," he said smoothly, "we need to talk about some dogs that don't belong to you." Kaiser's growl was unlike anything Ryder had ever heard, deep, threatening, but layered with something else. Pain, recognition. This was the man who had hurt him, who had taken Magnus, who had broken countless dogs in the name of military progress. But as they stood trapped between the approaching forces and this singular threat, none of them could have predicted what happened next. Because Kaiser hadn't just been trained as a guardian, he'd been trained as a weapon, and now that weapon was about to turn against its creator. Time seemed to slow down. The man in the pristine uniform, whose name badge read Colonel Richards, took a step forward, his hand moving to his pocket. "Now, Kaiser," he said, his voice carrying a tone of command that made the dog's muscles twitch. "Remember your training." But Kaiser didn't back down. His eyes, once dulled by trauma, now blazed with a fierce intelligence. He moved forward, positioning himself firmly between the colonel and his new family. The transformation was incredible. Every line of his body spoke of power, purpose, and protection. "Fascinating," the colonel mused, pulling out not a weapon, but a small black remote. "You know, he was one of our finest successes, the perfect combination of intelligence and loyalty, until he saw what happened to his brother." "Brother?" Ryder's voice cracked. "Magnus was—" "Oh yes," Richard smiled coldly. "Same litter. We usually prefer to train siblings. The bond makes them work harder, push further. Magnus was the obedient one. Kaiser—" He gestured at the growling shepherd. "Kaiser was the rebel. He actually tried to free the others during training, cost us months of work." Maria's hands flew to her mouth as the pieces clicked into place. "The night we found him in the alley, there was a break-in at a military facility 10 miles away. They said dogs got loose, but 17 of our finest specimens," Richard spat, "because this one decided to play hero after we had to discipline his brother for helping him." Kaiser's growl turned into something else, a sound of pure anguish. Ryder felt tears streaming down his face as he finally understood. Kaiser hadn't just been a victim, he'd been a rescuer. And Magnus? "What did you do to them?" Ryder's voice was barely a whisper. Richards held up the remote. The collars weren't just for training, they were for control. One push of this button and the electrical current would... He paused, smiling at Kaiser's visible flinch. Let's just say it made them very cooperative. Magnus lasted longer than most. But in the end, Kaiser lunged forward, but not at Richards. Instead, he grabbed the remote from the colonel's hand with surgical precision, a move he'd clearly been trained to perform. Before anyone could react, he'd crushed it in his powerful jaws. The effect was immediate. From inside the house came shouts of pain and confusion. The other German shepherds, the backup Richards had brought, were suddenly free of their own collar's control. And they remembered Kaiser. "Stand down!" Richards shouted, but his voice held an edge of panic now. The sound of breaking glass came from inside the house, as his own trained dogs turned against their handlers. Kaiser stood tall, his message clear to his fellow survivors. Freedom was possible. Redemption was possible. Love was possible. But Richards wasn't finished. He pulled out a gun, aiming not at Kaiser, but at Ryder. "Call him off," he ordered, "or I'll finish what I started with Magnus." What happened next would be talked about in whispers for years to come. Kaiser moved with impossible speed, not to attack, but to protect. He knocked Ryder aside as the shot rang out, taking the bullet in his shoulder. But even as he fell, he didn't bite, didn't attack. Instead, he looked Richards directly in the eyes, showing him something the man had never understood. True strength comes from love, not fear. The other shepherds burst from the house, surrounding Richards, not attacking, just containing, exactly as Kaiser had trained them during their escape. In the distance, sirens wailed. Maria had managed to call the police. As Richards raised his hands in surrender, surrounded by the very weapons he'd tried to create, Kaiser limped back to Ryder's side. Blood matted his fur, but his eyes were clear and proud. He had done what Magnus couldn't. He had exposed the truth. But as emergency vehicles flooded the street and Richards was taken into custody, no one noticed the small red light blinking on Kaiser's old collar. The colonel hadn't just been training dogs, he'd been gathering intelligence. And somewhere in a secure facility, computers were already analyzing years of data, preparing to create something even more dangerous than trained dogs. The real war was just beginning. At the veterinary hospital, Ryder paced the waiting room while Dr. Sarah Chen worked on Kaiser's wound. Maria sat nearby, organizing the evidence they had gathered. The other rescued shepherds had been taken to a secure animal sanctuary, but their eyes still haunted Ryder, each one carrying the same haunted look that Kaiser had worn at the shelter. "Mr. Ryder?" Dr. Chen emerged from the treatment room, her expression grave. "There's something you need to see." Inside, Kaiser lay on the examination table, sedated but stable. The bullet had been removed, but that wasn't what concerned Dr. Chen. She pointed to an X-ray displayed on her computer screen. "At first I thought these were just old injury marks," she explained, highlighting several spots along Kaiser's spine. "But look closer." Ryder leaned in, and his breath caught. Embedded in Kaiser's vertebrae were tiny metallic objects, each no larger than a grain of rice. "They're transmitters," Dr. Chen said softly. "Advanced ones. I've never seen anything like them. They're actually integrated with his nervous system." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. The collar wasn't just for control. It was for data collection, Ryder finished, the horrible truth dawning on him. They weren't just training dogs. They were studying how they think, how they feel, how they... "Love," came a new voice from the doorway. They turned to find a woman in a lab coat, her FBI badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Agent Diana Patel," she introduced herself, "and you've just stumbled into something much bigger than missing dogs." Over the next hour, Agent Patel revealed a truth more chilling than anything they'd imagined. Elite Guardian wasn't just a training facility. It was part of a classified program called Project Echo. Their goal wasn't to create better military dogs, but to understand and replicate the unique bond between humans and canines. "Think about it," Patel explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Dogs can detect diseases, predict seizures, sense emotions, abilities we barely understand. The military wanted to weaponize that connection. The transmitters in Kaiser's spine were recording everything, his emotional responses, his decision-making processes, even his dreams. Kaiser stirred on the table, whimpering softly in his sedated sleep. Ryder stroked his fur, feeling the raised scars that marked each transmitter's location. "But something went wrong, didn't it?" Maria asked, reviewing her shelter records with new eyes. "Kaiser and Magnus," Patel nodded. "They showed empathy levels off the charts, the ability to not just follow commands, but to understand the moral weight of those commands. When they realized what was happening to the other dogs, they tried to stop it," Ryder whispered, remembering Richard's words. "That's why Magnus had to be eliminated. He wasn't just helping Kaiser free the others. He was providing proof that the program was wrong." A soft beep from Dr. Chen's computer interrupted them. The X-ray image had changed, showing new data streams from the transmitters. Kaiser's brain activity was spiking, even under sedation. "He's remembering," Dr. Chen breathed, watching the patterns. "Everything they did to him, everything they made him see." Suddenly, Kaiser's eyes snapped open, but instead of fear or aggression, they showed something else: determination. He struggled to his feet, ignoring their attempts to keep him still, and limped to Dr. Chen's computer. The room fell silent as they watched the data streams change. Kaiser wasn't just remembering, he was deliberately activating the transmitters, sending out signals in a pattern too precise to be random. "He's trying to tell us something," Agent Patel said, quickly connecting her laptop to record the data. All this time, they thought they were studying him, but he was studying them, learning their protocols, their frequencies. The screens filled with encrypted data, locations, dates, personnel files. Everything Project Echo had tried to hide, stored in the very devices they had used to control their subjects. But as they began to decrypt the information, an alarm blared from Patel's laptop. Someone else was accessing the data stream. The transmitters in Kaiser's spine had become a beacon, and now they were broadcasting to multiple receivers. "They're coming," Patel said urgently, already reaching for her phone to call for backup. "And this time, they'll send worse than dogs." Kaiser stood shakily, his wound forgotten, and moved to the window. In the distance, black helicopters appeared against the night sky. He turned to Ryder, and in his eyes was a message clearer than any words. The evidence they needed was inside him, but extracting it would put everyone at risk. The choice was impossible: expose the truth and endanger everyone Kaiser had tried to protect, or destroy the evidence and let Project Echo continue its cruel work. But Kaiser had already made his decision. He pressed his head against Ryder's hand, sharing one moment of pure trust and love. Then, before anyone could stop him, he raced out of the clinic into the darkness. He would be the bait one last time, leading the danger away from those he loved. But this time, he wasn't running from his past. He was running toward justice, for Magnus, for all the other dogs, and for the sacred bond between humans and animals that no amount of military technology could ever truly understand. "No!" Ryder rushed to follow, but Agent Patel held him back. "Wait," she commanded, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. "The transmitters. We can track him, but more importantly, we can use them to protect him." Dr. Chen quickly joined her, pulling up Kaiser's neural data. "The frequencies they use to control the dogs. We might be able to reverse them, create a blocking signal." But Ryder wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the old photograph of Magnus that had started everything. Suddenly, he noticed something he'd missed before, a reflection in Magnus's service dog tag. Numbers, barely visible, 2751. "The research facility," Maria gasped, reading from the Project Echo files they had recovered. "Building 2, Lab 751, ... Where they kept the original data," Agent Patel finished. "Kaiser's not just running away. He's leading them exactly where he wants them to go." Through the tracking system, they watched Kaiser's signal moving with purpose through the city. The helicopters followed, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. But they didn't realize they were being played by a dog who'd spent years learning their tactics. "We need to move," Patel ordered, already calling in her team. "That facility houses more than just data. If what we found in Kaiser's transmitters is correct, they're preparing to launch Phase 2 of Project Echo." "What's Phase 2? Ryder asked, dreading the answer. "Human trials," Dr. Chen said quietly, reading from the decrypted files. "They've developed a way to replicate the canine empathy patterns they recorded. They're planning to create human soldiers with the loyalty and sensory capabilities of dogs, but none of the moral constraints that made Kaiser and Magnus resist." The implications were staggering. An army of soldiers with enhanced abilities, but no capacity for questioning orders, no ability to distinguish right from wrong. They raced through the night, following Kaiser's signal. But when they arrived at Building 2, they found something unexpected. The security systems were already disabled, and inside, Kaiser stood in the center of Lab 751, surrounded by servers containing years of Project Echo's research. At his feet lay the remains of what looked like a prototype neural transmitter carefully destroyed, and on the main screen, playing on a loop, was security footage that Kaiser had somehow accessed, footage of every experiment, every act of cruelty, every moment of resistance. But most importantly, there was Magnus. The footage showed the true story, how Magnus had helped Kaiser free the other dogs, how he'd used his service dog training to hack the security systems, and his final act of sacrifice, buying time for the others to escape. The helicopters were landing outside, and heavy boots thundered in the hallways. But it didn't matter anymore. Kaiser had already won. The truth was out, broadcast to multiple secure servers across the country. Project Echo's secrets were exposed. Agent Patel's team moved in, securing the facility. Dr. Chen rushed to Kaiser's side. He was swaying on his feet, the effort of his mission taking its toll on his injured body. But his eyes were clear and proud as Ryder knelt beside him. "You knew," Ryder whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You knew all along where the evidence was. You just needed someone to trust, someone to help you finish what Magnus started." Kaiser pressed his head against Ryder's chest, and in that moment, through the neural link that Project Echo had unwittingly created, Ryder felt what Kaiser felt. Not just emotions, but a complete understanding. The bond between humans and dogs wasn't something that could be replicated in a lab or weaponized. It was something pure, something sacred. But as federal agents swarmed the facility, and the truth of Project Echo began to shake the foundations of military research, a small red light still blinked deep within Kaiser's spine. Because the real secret, the one that even Project Echo hadn't fully grasped, was that their experiments hadn't failed. They had succeeded too well. Kaiser and Magnus hadn't just developed enhanced empathy. They had evolved into something more. And now, as Kaiser's neural patterns synchronized with Ryder's, a new chapter was beginning. The age of understanding between humans and animals hadn't ended. It was just beginning. In the days that followed, the world changed. News of Project Echo dominated headlines. Military officials were arrested, research facilities were shut down, and hundreds of enhanced dogs were discovered and freed. But the bigger story was happening in a quiet laboratory where Dr. Chen and Agent Patel worked to understand the true scope of what Kaiser and Magnus had achieved. "It's remarkable, Doctor," Chen said, studying the neural readings. The transmitters weren't just recording Kaiser's responses, they were evolving with him. Each time he made a moral choice, each time he chose compassion over conditioning, the network adapted. Ryder sat with Kaiser, who was recovering from his injuries. The bond between them had grown stronger, more profound. Sometimes Ryder would catch glimpses of Kaiser's memories, not just images, but feelings, understanding. He saw Magnus not as a lost brother, but as a hero who had discovered the truth about their potential. The military thought they were creating weapons, Agent Patel explained, reviewing the decrypted files. But Magnus figured it out first. These dogs weren't becoming more like machines. They were becoming more conscious, more aware, and they were teaching each other. Through their shared neural connection, Kaiser showed Ryder the full story. How Magnus, working as a service dog, had learned to read not just commands but intentions, emotions, the very essence of human thought. How he had shared this knowledge with Kaiser and the others. The transmitters, designed to control them, had instead become a network of shared consciousness. But there was something else, something that made Kaiser restless. Through their link, Ryder felt it, a growing awareness of other dogs, not just the enhanced ones from Project Echo, but ordinary dogs across the city. They were connecting, sharing, evolving. Maria, who had been helping rehabilitate the rescued dogs, noticed it first. "They're different now," she said. "It's like they're all talking to each other, understanding things in a new way." Late one night, as Kaiser led Ryder through the city park, they saw it. Dogs and their humans, connected not by leashes but by something deeper. The park had become a gathering place, a sanctuary where the boundaries between species began to blur. Dr. Chen's research confirmed what they were witnessing. The transmitters created a bridge, she explained. But once that bridge existed, dogs started building their own connections. They're teaching us as much as we taught them. But with this new understanding came challenges. Some people feared this evolution, this deepening of the human-animal bond. Others tried to exploit it, to recreate Project Echo's results for their own gain. Kaiser's nightmares had changed. No longer was he running from his past. Now he was racing toward a future he could sense but not fully grasp. Through their connection, Ryder felt his urgency, his need to protect not just the enhanced dogs, but all humans, the very relationship that made both species unique. Then came the message that changed everything, a signal pulsing through the network of connected minds, weak but unmistakable. Somewhere, somehow, Magnus was alive. The coordinates led to a remote facility in the mountains, one not on any official record. As Ryder and Kaiser prepared for one last mission, they knew the stakes had never been higher. Because Magnus hadn't just survived, he had discovered something that would change the world forever. The true purpose of Project Echo hadn't been to create better soldiers or more obedient dogs. It had been to prepare for something bigger, a leap in evolution that would bridge the gap between all living beings. As they loaded supplies into Ryder's truck, Kaiser shared one last memory through their link. A moment from his early training when Magnus had told him, in the way only dogs can speak to each other, "They think they're teaching us to be more like them, but we're teaching them to be more like us." The sun set behind the mountains as they began their journey. In the back of the truck, the rescued dogs from Project Echo sat alert, their minds linked in a growing network of consciousness. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to a revolution that had begun with one dog's choice to value love over obedience. The next chapter wouldn't just be about saving Magnus. It would be about saving the very soul of two species bound together by something stronger than any technology, the capacity to love, to trust, and to evolve together. The mountain facility loomed before them as dawn broke, its concrete walls stark against the snow-covered peaks. Kaiser's body tensed as memories flooded through his neural link with Ryder. This was where it had all started, where the first experiments had begun. Agent Patel's team surrounded the perimeter, while Dr. Chen monitored the neural networks from their mobile command center. The signal from Magnus was growing stronger, but something about it felt different, more complex than before. "We're picking up multiple consciousness signatures," Dr. Chen reported, her voice filled with wonder. "It's not just Magnus in there. There are hundreds of connected minds." Through Kaiser's enhanced senses, Ryder could feel it too, a vast web of thoughts and emotions emanating from within the facility. But there was something else, something that made Kaiser whine with a mixture of joy and concern. "He's changed," Kaiser communicated through their link. Magnus found what they were really looking for. The facility's doors were unlocked, the security systems disabled. As they moved through the empty corridors, they found laboratories filled with advanced equipment, but no personnel. Everything was still running, maintaining itself, as if the humans had simply walked away. Then they found the central chamber. Magnus stood in the center of a vast room, but he wasn't alone. Surrounding him were dozens of animals, not just dogs, but wolves, dolphins in massive tanks, primates, and even elephants. Each wore a version of the neural transmitters, but these were different from the military models. They were organic, grown rather than implanted. "Brother?" Magnus's thoughts reached out to Kaiser and through him to Ryder. "You found your human bridge. Now let me show you what I found." Through their connected consciousness, Magnus shared the truth. The military's Project Echo had been built on top of something much older, a research facility dedicated to understanding the evolution of consciousness itself. The original scientists had discovered that animals weren't just capable of emotion and intelligence. They were capable of a form of consciousness that humans had forgotten. The transmitters weren't meant to control us, Magnus explained. They were meant to remind us, all of us, of what we once were, what we could be again. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over their comms, filled with excitement. The neural patterns, they're not just communicating, they're synchronizing. Every animal in that room is becoming part of a larger consciousness. But with this revelation came a warning. Magnus showed them what had driven the facility's staff away, the realization that they couldn't control this evolution. The animals weren't becoming more like humans. Instead, they were helping humans remember their connection to all living things. The military wanted weapons, Magnus shared. Instead, they created bridges. But some humans aren't ready for this connection. They fear it. They're coming to shut us down, to bury this discovery forever. As if on cue, alarms began to blare. On their monitors, they watched as military helicopters approached, carrying teams trained to eliminate any trace of Project Echo. But Kaiser and Magnus had prepared for this. Through their enhanced network, they reached out not just to the animals in the facility, but to every creature within miles. The response was overwhelming. Wolves emerged from the forests, eagles circled overhead, and even the mountain itself seemed to pulse with ancient awareness. Ryder felt it through his link with Kaiser, a choice that would change humanity forever. They could shut down the network, return to the old separation between humans and animals, or they could take the next step in evolution, embracing a consciousness that bridged all living things. It's not about control anymore, Kaiser shared, standing beside his brother. It's about remembering what we all once knew, that life is connected, that consciousness flows through everything. The military teams landed, their weapons ready. But as they approached the facility, they found themselves surrounded by a display of unity, unlike anything in human history. Every animal, enhanced or natural, stood together, not in aggression, but in simple, powerful truth. Through the neural network, Kaiser and Magnus shared their memories, not just of their own experiences, but of the ancient knowledge they had rediscovered. The soldiers lowered their weapons, overwhelmed by the connection they felt to the creatures around them. In that moment, the true purpose of Project Echo was fulfilled, not as a military program, but as the first step toward healing the rift between humans and the natural world. But as dawn broke over the mountains, casting golden light through the facility's windows, both Kaiser and Magnus knew their work wasn't finished. Because somewhere in the world, other facilities held pieces of this discovery. Other animals waited to be freed, and other humans needed to remember what their ancestors had known, that the greatest power isn't in controlling nature, but in becoming one with it. 5 years later, the Last Hope Animal Shelter had transformed. What was once a place of last chances had become a center of new beginnings. Maria stood in the courtyard, watching as children sat in circles with dogs, their minds gently linked through the new organic transmitters that Dr. Chen had developed. Kaiser and Magnus, their coats now touched with silver, lay in the shade of the old oak tree. Through their enhanced consciousness, they guided the younger dogs, teaching them to bridge the gap between animal instinct and human thought. Ryder, now running the center's consciousness integration program, knelt beside a young girl who was meeting her first therapy dog. Through the neural link, he felt her anxiety melt away as she experienced the pure, unconditional love that only an animal could provide. "It's amazing, Doctor," Chen said, reviewing her latest data. "The children who come here don't just learn to communicate with the dogs. They learn to understand all living things. The empathy carries over to everything: plants, insects, the entire ecosystem." Agent Patel, who had become the head of the new Interspecies Understanding Division, nodded in agreement. The military finally understood. The real power wasn't in creating better weapons, but in creating better connections. The enhanced dogs have become the greatest peacekeepers we've ever had. The truth about Project Echo had changed the world, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of enhanced soldiers, they had created enhanced understanding. The neural network had spread, not as a tool of control, but as a bridge between species. Kaiser watched as a butterfly landed on Magnus's nose, sharing in his brother's gentle amusement. Through their link, they remembered the dark days of their training, the fear, the pain. But those memories no longer held power over them. They had transformed their trauma into teaching, their suffering into wisdom. In the years since the mountain facility, other discoveries had emerged. Ancient cave paintings showing humans and animals sharing consciousness. Indigenous traditions that spoke of a time when all creatures could communicate. Project Echo hadn't created something new. It had helped humanity remember something very old. As the sun began to set, Ryder sat between the two brothers, their minds joining in the effortless communion they now shared. Through their connection, he felt Kaiser's contentment, Magnus's quiet joy, and something more, a sense of completion. "You know," Ryder said softly, "when I first saw you in that shelter, Kaiser, I thought I was saving you. but you were really saving all of us." Kaiser's response flowed through their link, carrying not just thoughts, but the accumulated wisdom of his journey. No one saves anyone alone. We save each other. That's what connection means. Magnus added his own insight. The experiments were looking for the key to animal consciousness, but consciousness was never the key. Love was. Love is what bridges all gaps, heals all wounds, and opens all doors. Around them, the shelter hummed with activity as the next generation of children learned to open their minds and hearts to the animal world. The neural transmitters were no longer needed for the youngest ones. They were growing up with the innate ability to connect, to understand, to empathize. As night fell, Kaiser and Magnus shared one last insight through the network they had helped create. The true evolution hadn't been technological or even biological. It had been spiritual, a return to an ancient understanding that all life is connected, that consciousness flows through everything, and that love is the force that binds it all together. Ryder felt tears in his eyes as he embraced both dogs, feeling the depth of their bond, the completeness of their journey. The story that had begun with a broken dog in a shelter had become a testament to the transformative power of love, trust, and understanding. In the end, Project Echo's greatest discovery hadn't been about enhancing animals or controlling consciousness. It had been about remembering a simple truth that every dog already knew, that the heart's capacity for love is infinite, that trust can heal the deepest wounds, and that together, humans and animals could create something greater than either could achieve alone. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Kaiser and Magnus raised their heads and howled, not in sorrow or loneliness, but in celebration of a world where no creature needed to feel broken or alone again. Their song was joined by dogs across the city, then across the country, a symphony of voices celebrating the bond that had always existed between all living things. And in that moment, every human who heard it felt what Kaiser had known all along, that love is the ultimate evolution, and that together we all find our way home.